Hey everyone, welcome back to my Swiss Army medic bag build. This is part 3 and the final part, I promise. We left off with testing rivets on the leather to see how they were going to work when I put the snaps on the corners. I wanted to make sure I tested a little of that before I got it right. Now, again, my name is Paul. I'm a builder, maker, artist, whatever you want to call me, but feel free to check out the previous 2 videos if you want to check out how I cut out the bag and got to where we are now. So moving forward, the next step in the bag process was adding the bent out inserts in the pocket. Basically, it's a piece of leather that is wet formed and is designed to hold the materials in the bag when you're done. We've reached a point in the build where I have to follow a certain process to finish the bag. Because if I put the rivets on this part of the bag or that part of the bag, I may not be able to reach in the bag to get to them to sew. Or if I stitch something first, I may not be able to get access to the bag to put the rivets in. So I had to really be careful about the process of the bag. The first thing I did is I found some leather that were just the right thickness that I was able to wet form into the design of the pockets that I wanted. Now, one thing I did different than the original bag was in the original bag, there is a rolled over piece of leather for like a pencil holder or a tube on the top portion, but on the bottom portion, it's just flat. I decided to make them the same so I could put pencils in and not have them jiggle around. They wouldn't slide out on me. So that was something I did different. Wet forming it was pretty straightforward. I took the leather, dipped it into some water, shaped it over some blocks and some other pieces of just stuff I had around the house. And then I used some A-clamps and pencils and stuff to hold it down in position while it dried overnight. Once that was done, I was able to attach those to the panel that becomes the pocket in the bag. Again, this is one of those things I have to do before I sew the pocket into the rest of the bag, because once the pocket is sewn in, I wouldn't be able to reach the rivets. So I started by putting the rivets into the parts of the pocket that hold it to the leather, punched it through. I'm using double-sided rivets. You just put them together, hammer, and they lock. Next, it was time to add the holders on the back side of the bag. These would have the D-rings on them and is where you would put your strap. I cut out 2 pieces of leather, had dyed them, folded them over, again, punched holes in them. You'll see here I'm punching holes, lining them up, and then always a little nervous when you have to make holes in your project, but you got to get there sometime. Again, I was punching the leather, used a slightly longer double-sided rivet, and attached it and put it together. Once the straps were attached to the pocket, the next step is I wanted to attach the flaps that you see here open on the side of the bag. If you remember, these flaps are designed to hold the bag open. They keep anything in the bag from falling out. When I punched the holes here, I decided to go punch them separately. The issue I was running into is if you put the leather flap up against the pieces of leather that were designed on the pockets, it was a little thick and I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get a straight hole by punching through everything. So what I did is I lined it up and figured out how many punches were in each one, and I punched all the holes in the pocket, and then I punched all the holes in the softer leather on the sides. And I also ended up punching the other side of leather, the bottom part that's going to be sewn to the flap of the bag, because it was just easier to do while I had that. So this was a pretty straightforward stitch. It was a little tricky because some of the holes, as usual, were a little tight. So you just use the awl, use some pliers, get everything pulled out, and it all worked out. The next step was attaching the pocket to the bag. Now, in order to do that, we're looking at a 90-degree angle type of sewing procedure. So I've never done that before. So it started by punching regular holes on one side of the bag and then lining it up and punching holes almost exactly in the same position. Then you take an awl, and you have to take your awl and put everything through the bag. You're actually taking the awl, going through the hole and coming out the thickness of the leather. You can see here, I'll zoom in a little so you can see the process. So it's a time-consuming process and you don't want to screw it up. And I did screw it up a few times. There are a few holes that I ended up ripping. I ripped the holes and I just hope they were clean when the bag was done. So the next step was stitching this together. The stitching process was pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of, because the leather is poked out with the awl, it's not always a perfect size hole for the needle. So sometimes you're repoking it with the awl. Other times I'm grabbing a pair of pliers and stitching it. It took a little while to stitch, but eventually I got the side 1 done. Side 2 was a little more complicated, but it did take a while. Once the pocket was attached to the bag, Now that I also had the sides attached, it was figuring out where to lay the bottom parts of the pockets into the side areas. Everything lined up with the holes. And again, remember, I pre-punched the holes. So I was pretty much able to line those up. I glued to tack them. So basically, I took some white glue, I glued them to the spot on the bag where I wanted to, on the flaps, and I tacked it in place and let it dry. This way, I could just use the previous made holes and line everything up, and everything lined up perfectly. Made some new holes, and then it was on to the stitching process. Again, the stitching process was pretty much straightforward. This was an easier stitch than, let's say, the corners we did. And I just kept on stitching and would use everything as needed to get it done. Next up on the bag is I wanted to attach some of the other hardware. So it was time to start putting on some snaps. And of course, I had to add some snaps to the pocket in advance before I sewed it on. I forgot to tell you about that earlier, but I did add some of the snaps to the pockets before I attached it. Again, I wouldn't be able to attach those snaps once the bag was stitched together, once the pocket was stitched to the back side of the bag. So I added those. Now that we had those attached, once I had the flaps in place, I was able to mark the exterior location of the snaps. I used a little Sharpie and just, wrote on it and hold them together, and you make a little imprint, as you can see here, and that way I knew kind of the center of where I needed to attach my previous snap. So I went around the bag and attached all the snaps, which was a okay process. The snaps were a little tough to use. I ended up using a hand grip snap setter versus a hammering one. It was a lot easier. And once the snaps were set in, we lined everything up. I also attached the top closure flap. That was attached with rivets. And once all of this was attached, it was a matter of finishing up the bag with the front cover. Again, those were like two little corner stitches. So same process as I did on the sides of the bags. I lined up the corners, marked them, stitched them. Pretty straightforward. You're just going to see it here. I'm not going to waste your time on it. And once we got it all done, the bag is done. I am very happy with the way the bag turned out. It was a great learning process, a great learning experience of things I've never tried before. I might consider doing it again. I might consider making a template, but it was definitely a learning process. And honestly, I think the bag looks great. It's got its flaws, but I love them. I ended up signing the inside of the bag with a imprint. I put my initials on the bottom of the bag, but I put handmade by artist Paul Porowski on the inside of the bag. It's really subtle. And the rest of the bag, I think, looks fantastic. I hope you enjoyed watching this series. And if I make a pattern available, I'll add some links to one of these videos. But I appreciate your time. And thanks again for watching. And good luck with any leather work you make. And feel free, I'll answer questions if you have them in the comments, because I did learn a lot from this, and I'm more than happy to answer some questions. And if you don't want to hit me up on YouTube, feel free to put the questions out on my other social media platforms, as you see here. I'm more than happy to answer questions. And if you go to those other platforms, you'll see some progress videos as well. Probably stuff you saw in here, but I think I might have posted a few other things that were not in this video. Again, thanks a lot, and good luck with your leather work.